Candles crowded the great hall like a field of small, wavering stars, each wick a thin menagerie of light trapped in wax. The banners hung heavy, colors subdued by smoke. The crowned stag on gold, the lion on crimson, the dire wolf running gray, and others in their finery. 100 musicians wrote braids of melody through the air, and the laughter of the court came in warm waves, breaking and retreating, loaded with perfumes and wine. Sansa sat beneath the glow of it all with her hands folded neatly in her lap, the facet of a garnet ring catching the light whenever she shifted. She had practiced that tilt of the wrist. She had practiced the smile, not too wide, not too eager. Septa Mordane had drilled 100 small graces into her, and tonight, among the lords and ladies and knights of bright renown, it felt as if each careful lesson glimmered on her skin. Joffrey sat 2 places down with his mother's green gaze on him, and when the prince turned to say some polished thing to Ser Loras, Sansa felt the familiar little shock strike her chest. He was lovely as a prince in songs, high-boned, sun-ripe, and composed, except for the way his mouth sometimes tightened when he believed no one watched.
Ned stark vatsked.
He drank sparingly and ate as one who had left his hunger elsewhere long ago. Smoke coiled from boar haunches and honeyed carrots, from river fish glazed with herbs, from crusts broken open to steam. The men of the city gorged themselves on spectacle. A mummer with bells sewn along his sleeves, a conjurer who made ribbons flow out of his mouth as if he were unspooling his own tongue, and a dwarf turned somersaults that ended in mock bows to a laughing king. Robert was thunder and merriment, pounding the board with meaty good humor, cheeks lit with wine and flame. When he guffawed, the hall seemed to heave with him, as though the rafters had breath. "So this is what your snow's by us," the king boomed, half an hour into the feast, clapping a leg of meat to Ser Barristan's shoulder like a benediction. "Honor, dull as old iron, and the best tourney I've seen since I was young enough to swing a hammer without losing my wind." Cersei's smile was slim, a line of light across ivory. "We are indebted to the hand for the celebration," she said, and her lashes fluttered once, a curtsy of shadows that mocked the courtesy she spoke. Ned returned nothing more than a nod. The weight of a daughter's wolf pelt he could not lift any more pressed at his chest. A ghost's mantle. It had been weeks, and yet when the hall filled with people and music, when he saw the soft drape of fur on some lord's shoulders or thought, he caught the smell of northern campfires in a candle's greasy smoke, lady's warm shape came back beneath his hand. He saw a butcher's boy running on the river path, eyes wide, a royal blade flicking out of sunlight, a queen's cool voice sealing the fate of a creature born to love his girl, Sansa's girl. His mind pressed on that memory as if on a bruise. He had not been swift enough then. He had bent to a king and to peace and to years of friendship that had turned sour in his mouth. He had been slow. The lesson had been clear and cruel. Softness did not save children. Robert lifted his goblet to the light. "To victories," he cried. "To bets won and lost, to legs broken and to songs fat with lies, and to the hand who has fed and amused us, and made me remember for a day what it is to be alive." Laughter rose again. Renly, golden and easy, tucked a stray petal from the flower girl into his sleeve and flashed a smile to his brother the king. Ser Loras, all fresh bloom and powdered hair, preened under the hall's collective gaze. Even old Pycelle creaked in his seat with a whiskery smirk, the candlelight blown through his beard like wind through thistle. Lord Stark, Littlefinger's voice, oily as a beaver's fur, slipped into the space beside Ned. "If I were a man who wagered, though of course I am not, I would lay 3-1 that the next course will be a swan in a gilded pastry, and that it will taste of grease regardless of its crown." "If you are not a man who wagers," Ned said, not looking at him, "then perhaps you are a man who listens. You hear much, I am told." Peter Baelish followed the line of Ned's gaze to Sansa and beyond, to where Joffrey's cuff shone with tiny lions. "I listen, but men do not always like the songs," he murmured, "even when they are true. I am done with songs." Ned rose. The motion was simple, an old man standing to ease his back, except it folded every conversation near him into silence. "Robert, Mid-story about a boar he had once nearly strangled with his bare hands, faltered and turned, ale wet on his beard. "Your Grace," Ned said, and his voice broke across the hall's careless noise like a blade tapping a wine glass, carried not because he shouted but because it refused to bend. Robert's good humor drew back a step, wary. "Ned," he said, half wary and half affectionate, "don't tell me there's a complaint about the boar. It fought like an ox and tasted like a lover." Ned felt the eyes, a quart's worth, slide over him. Some were warm, many were cold. Cersei's were winter glass. Joffrey sat taller, pale interest sharpening into something whiter and harder as the hand faced the throne. Sansa's mouth parted. "Forgive me the rudeness of bringing sober words into feast," Ned said. "But some things rot if left till morning." Robert blinked. "Rot? The cooks will grieve. It concerns my daughter." Cersei's fingers, elegant as reeds, stilled upon her cup. Joffrey did not turn his head, merely narrowed his eyes in the manner of a boy who believes he can glare a storm away. Sansa felt the heat behind her eyes rise as if a candle had been set too close to her face. She did not move, not even when Septa Mordane's hand found her wrist in warning. "My daughter Sansa is betrothed to your son," Ned said. His voice did not tremble. It did not accuse. It laid out the first stone. "This was arranged between friends, and on that promise I brought my children south, and the north opened its gates to the south's warmth. We did this with trust." Robert said. He looked confused almost, and then wary, and then a heaviness thickened his features. And that trust is broken."
Ned stood straight up.
The dire wolf on his doublet lady's long, stitched line caught the flicker of candle flame. "Your son has shown himself cruel. He lied about a fight he began by threatening a girl and a boy who had done him no wrong. A boy was hunted to death on the road by a sworn knight, and a wolf who had harmed no soul was ordered slain afterward. I begged mercy. I was not granted it. My daughter knelt weeping, and mercy was still denied. I will not give her to that." He turned his gaze upon Joffrey then, not king or queen, but prince, not lion nor crown, but boy. "I will not." A sound swept the hall, one of those breaths that carries 100 different ideas of surprise inside it. Delight, fury, hungry curiosity. Knives paused against plates. The mummers' bells fell still of their own shame. Joffrey's mouth opened. He was beautiful like a blade. "You forget yourself," he said softly, the way a boy mimics a man's close-held threat. Cersei moved at last, her goblet striking the board with a sharp, measured ring. "Lord Stark, you mistake a prince for a butcher, and a queen for a catspaw. There are lines in a realm." Her smile did not reach her eyes. "You cannot redraw them because the North has suffered a pet to die." Sansa's cheeks were hot enough to scald. She couldn't swallow. Her father's words lay like stones on a frozen river, each one a step leading into a darkness she refused to believe. Joffrey was looking at her now, no, at her father above her, and there was a coldness there that stung, and an ember of embarrassment, and it hurt that she could see them both, that she could understand them and still long to reach for his hand. Robert's voice came slow, like a man walking into a night without his lantern. "Ned," he said, "you do not do this at my table. You do not speak of the prince as if he were some braying ass at the village fair. The realm watches. Think. The realm watches," Ned said. "And the realm should see what its lords will and will not bear. I am hand of the king, but I am father first. I will not deliver my child to a cruelty and to a house that treats justice as meat to be carved when it pleases. If honor cannot prick your ears, Robert, then hear this as lord to lord. The match is broken." Joffrey half rose. The hound's hand came to his shoulder and held him with the ease with which a man restrains an overeager hound on a leash. Sandor's burned face shimmered in the candlelight like old leather oiled too often. His eyes were unreadable. "Sit," he said low. Cersei stood. The air went thin. "You shame my son," she said. "You shame your king, and you imagine you can dress treason in furs and call it fatherhood. Each word clicked, a bead on a quiet string. Your daughter is betrothed, and she will remain betrothed until the king releases her, or she dies. Those are the laws as my father learned them in books and as I learned them at my mother's knee. Or do Starks keep their own gods and their own laws in that pale country of theirs? Renly had turned his face slightly away, as men sometimes do to savor a slap delivered by one not themselves. Ser Loras watched Joffrey with the bright, idle interest of a cat eyeing a bird through glass. Robert slammed a fist onto the board hard enough to make the plates jump. 7 hells enough, he bellowed. This is a feast. This is not court. Ned, you'll not make a scene in front of the green boys from the Fingers and the flower-bedecked swords from the Reach. You'll speak to me in private and you'll speak sense. We'll not give those who hate my peace reason to cheer. Ned inclined his head, but he did not sit. Then hear me now, privately in public, he said, as man to man. He turned to Sansa then, and the room vanished for a heartbeat. He saw her little face, serious in Winterfell's hot springs, steam making tendrils of hair curl against her brow. He saw her holding Lady's head in her lap, only asleep, only waiting to be told to rise. He chose. In the morning, Ned said, eyes steady on his daughters. You will sail for White Harbor with Septa Mordane and a guard of my men. You will go home. The shock that ran through Sansa was not a breath. It was a plunge into cold water. The world snapped clear and bright. No, she said without realizing that she had spoken. And she rose too, temper and terror rushing into her in equal fierce floods. 100 faces turned toward the pretty daughter of the hand who had all the songs in her eyes. She had never stood before this many people with her throat laid bare. Father, you cannot. You promised. You promised me. I promised you safety, Ned said. It strangled him to keep his voice level, to not reach for her, to not take her hand as if that could drag her from the tide that would otherwise fling her against sharp rocks. And you will have it, for as long as I can carve it out of the world. I am his, Sansa said, and at that Joffrey's chin lifted, the smallest bit, as if she had given him a gift. I am meant to be his. You told me we would be queen and honor Winterfell. She was breathing too fast. Hot tears threatened. She held them with a singer's training, only her voice fraying at the ends. You are my blood, Ned said softly. That is the only ment that binds us. You overstep, Cersei snapped, but Robert seized her sleeve. Enough, he said again, though it was less bellow and more plea. His eyes went to Sansa's wet eyes and away again, quickly. Ned, you send the girl home if you wish it. She's your girl. The betrothal stands until I decide otherwise. He gritted his teeth against the look his queen shot him. We talk in the morning. For now, we drink. Ned bowed. It was neither victory nor defeat. Something inside him eased and something inside him burned as if the air were thin. Sansa swayed, then sat, hands very still in her lap. The tears did not fall. They burned the backs of her eyes like trapped sparks, stinging, threatening to scorch. The songs she had hoarded in men's voices and grainy parchment told her that vows were the cloth of the world, woven so tightly that a single unpicked thread might unravel a tapestry. She had pressed those vows to her heart and believed them to be a shining rope that would drag her to a room with a balcony and a golden crown. Now her father had cut the rope as if it were old yarn. Joffrey did not look at her again. He stared past Ned, past Robert, at some point on the hall's far wall, jaw bunched. The hound had not moved his cooling hand from the prince's shoulder. Littlefinger leaned close to Ned once more. The swan will be ruined, he sighed. And we have not yet come to the course with the little sugar castles. When Ned did not answer, Peter added, so low that only the hand could hear, choose quickly. If you mean to fly, fly with both wings. Ned turned his face toward him a fraction. You will not be one of them, Peter, and you know which them I mean. We are all someone's them, Littlefinger murmured. His mouth smiled, his eyes did not. But I have a fondness for pretty things that grow in hard soil. The rest of the feast blurred. Music resumed. The king forced the merriment forward with curses and jests. And the courtiers obeyed because what else are courtiers but weathercocks for a king's wind? Words drifted through, bright bits of chaff. Renly laughing. Loras murmuring about a tilt. Varys clucking gentle condolences into ears that did not need them. Ned sat. He drank more than he had meant to, and it did not soften him. It only made every face burn with edges. When the plates had been cleared and the last song had been sung too loudly by a merchant lord to entangle himself with the gentry, Ned stood and left before the king dismissed anyone at all. On the steps down to the yard, he found Jory Castle waiting. The night hugged the red keep like a thing with breath, and the sea's unseen palm pressed cold on the ramparts. "We ride at first light," Ned said. "Find 20 men you trust to as many ends as you can envision. Half go with Sansa and the Septa to the river gate. The other half prepare our ship at the anchorage. The Wind Witch, she leaves on the morning tide. She will not wait. If the city tries to stop them at the mud gate, show them this." He held out a thin strip of parchment sealed in hard wax. It bore a stag stamped so deep it had cracked faintly across the flank when the wax cooled. Robert had signed it with a heavy, impatient hand. Jory's mouth twitched. "Your grace must have been in good wine." He was in friendship. Ned's voice was dry. "Sometimes they are the same. See to the men. No noise. No boasting. Remember you are northern." "That we are," Jory said, and vanished into the night with Winterfell's shadow beside him. Ned stood a little while longer under the breath of the sea. He found himself counting the ways the next morning might break. He watched each one open like a flower and close like a fist until he had no hands left. When he pushed open the door to the solar, Arya was on the floor, sweat dampening the hair at her nape, boot heels scuffing as she danced a small dance with a wooden sword. Syrio Farrell sat on the window seat like a cat made of angles and philosophy. "Morning comes," Syrio said, though the hall's music still scratched faintly at the walls. "It is always morning somewhere. Your feet are troublesome," Arya said, breathless with pride. She turned and saw her father, and her face broke into a grin that was more home than any place in the city. "We learned the cat. He says I am a cat now. A skinny one that bites." Ned looked at her and saw a dozen futures crackling like kindling. "I need you to be a bird at dawn," he said gently. "I need you to fly with your sister." Arya's mouth went flat. Immediately her eyes flicked to the table where her needle lay in its little dark sheath. "No," she said, honest and quick. "I'm learning. I'm getting better. Syrio says you win by being the water, and I can be the water. Only if I go I'll be in a stupid boat and—" Syrio rose. "The water remembers," he said. "It flows home by secret paths. Do as your father says, little cat. Men carve the city with their bad knives tonight." "I'm not little," Arya muttered, but a pinch of fear had taken her and was walking with it on her face. She bit the inside of her cheek. "Is it Joffrey? I could stab him." "No one will stab anyone in my name," Ned said. "We leave because I am late to see what I should have seen from the start. There will be time for your dancing. In Winterfell, the halls are long and empty and cold. The smack of your feet on the stone will wake the ghosts." "Do they dance?" Arya brightened appropriately. "Badly," Ned said, and she almost smiled. "Get some sleep," he told her. He bent and touched her hair, a gesture so familiar the world itself recognized, and paused to listen. "You will rise before the sun." When he reached Sansa's chamber, the Septa sat with her lap full of cloth, fingers twining and untwining a length of ribbon as if it were a rosary for a gentler god than the ones in the September. Sansa stood by the window looking out at the city's broken lights. She did not turn when he entered. "I will not go," she said through the glass. "Then you will be carried," Ned said, not harshly. His mouth felt like a cut. "And I would rather spare you that indignity and myself. Sleep. We rouse before dawn." Her shoulders lifted and fell slowly. "You have shamed me," she said. She turned then, and the anger in her face lanced him as no Lannister spear could have. Before everyone, in front of him, "You made me a child in a hall full of men." "You are my child," Ned said, weary, and this made her flinch. If a hall full of men cannot hold that truth without scorn, then the hall is wrong, not the truth. I hate you. She said it very carefully, as if the words themselves might shatter if dropped carelessly. Ned had stood on winter ramparts with wind knifing through fur and mail. He had listened to a girl's soft fantasies about songs and summer and gold. None of those moments had stripped him as this one did. For a heartbeat, he almost offered to give everything back, to bind up the hurt of tonight with his own blood, to let the world devour him if it would spare this child this disappointment. He did not move. "You do not," he said softly. "You think you do. The thing you love is not what you think." "The thing I love is a prince," Sansa said. "And I know what princes are." Ned lifted a hand and then let it fall. "Sleep," he said again. He left before he could betray himself. The city changed in the last hours before morning. Night grew thin and gray, a poor cloth stretched too tight, fraying from strain. The Red Keep seemed to lean closer to the sea. Jory moved the household with northern hush. Boots did not scuff. Doors did not bang. The women wept without sound. The ship's master had been paid to be discreet and obedient in equal measure. He had both. Sansa did not weep. She tried not to blink. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Joffrey's face at the moment her father refused him. Pride, like a jewel, pressed into him and yielded to a hot panic underneath. At the river gate, the gold cloaks had gathered in a yellow knot. Janos Slynt sat a horse as if it were a chair, all square and sure. He had small eyes for a large man, and they moved carefully, counting. "King's writ," Jory said quietly. He held it up. It looked thin as any paper when confronted with steel heads and short swords and the mud milk stinks of the river. Slynt glanced at the wax, then at the girl with her hood up and the set of her shoulders, then at the man in gray who watched the world through pale eyes as if he were measuring and would weigh you accordingly. Ned had come to the gate himself. It was a risk, but he had refused to let his girls pass that narrow world choke without his own gaze on the men who controlled it. "The Queen has sent to say," he began. "The King has sent to say," Ned cut in, "that I do as I please with my daughter. If there is to be a writ measuring, let us take each paper and weigh them with the hand scales. I'll wager the King's stag is minted heavier." Slynt's mouth worked. Soldiers felt each other, tense cables strung between orders. There was a moment when the city teetered. Renly Baratheon appeared like an afterthought on a dark gelding, his cloak the color of new leaves. He laughed lightly, as men do when they plan to pretend something is not happening and intend to win by refusing to grant it gravity. "The Hand sends his daughter to see the sea," he announced in tones made to be overheard. "Is this our famous hospitality? Let the child pass. The morning grows damp." Slynt considered the pretty lord's pretty sarcasm and the weight of the Hand's eyes and the stamp of the stag on the parchment. He breathed out slowly. "Pass," he said, and made a motion that could have been command or resignation. In cities, such things were often the same. The first men went through. The boat bobbed against the quay like a thing impatient. Septa Mordane clutched her prayer strip as if she intended to strangle the river with it. Arya gnawed at her lip and scowled, a combination that made her look like a ragged fisher lad who had misplaced his boat. Sansa walked between them, her gown plain for travel, her hair coiled tight as if that would hold all the parts of her safer. She did not look back at the gate. She did not look at her father. It would break something inside her she was not ready to see. "Wait," said a voice she did not expect, and the Hound stepped into her path. Sandor Clegane had a way of moving that did not seem so much motion as an absence of noise obliging itself. Up close, his burned flesh was a map of old pain. Up close, his eyes were not cruel. He looked at Sansa's face and then at the hood of her cloak. He lifted a hand, and she flinched, not out of fear exactly, but because all her nerves lived on the skin now, arguments waiting to be pricked. The Hound took the edge of her hood and pulled it a fraction lower on her brow as if she were a child in a draft. "Keep it there," he said. "The city has too many eyes." She wanted to thank him, and she wanted to tell him he was a monster, and she wanted to ask him why, always why, in 100 small ways she did not understand. What she said was nothing. He stepped aside. His burned cheek twitched as if with a tic that once might have been a smile in another man. Ned watched the boat shove off and saw both of his girls aboard, smaller for the distance already. A tightness like a wire around his ribs did not ease. It learned new ways to hurt. He stood until the boat was a darker thought on the river's brightening water, until even that had slipped downriver toward the anchorage where the wind which would lift its arms and, if the gods were edged kindly today, bear his children out of the city's mouth. "Take the men back," he told Jory. "I'm for the king." He found Robert with his head in a basin, black-mood and fending off a brace of over-helpful servants with many oaths. Cersei's absence was a physical pleasure in the room. "You are free with my seals," Robert growled, then spat into the basin. The spittle was pink. "You signed," Ned said. "I sign many things. My hand is a whore who sleeps with any parchment that crawls into her bed." The king straightened and winced as if someone had pried open his ribs. "Cersei has been hissing for a hunt to clear my humor. I shall go before her tongue peels the flesh from my bones. You and I will talk proper after I kill something with tusks. Take fewer skins," Ned said, before friendship or fear could stop him. Robert squinted. "Spoil sport," he said. "You speak like a man with children." "I do," Ned said. "I want you to grow old enough to find that insult less clever." Robert grimaced but did not argue. For a heartbeat, a memory moved through his face like a fish underwater. 2 boys in a feast smaller than this, a girl laughing with snow in her hair, dreams too big for Winterfell's stone. Then it was gone. "See Pycelle," he said roughly. "If you're determined to scrape my bones clean of corruption, he has a book he will thrust upon you until you are both old and bored. I swear the man can cure insomnia with a whisper." "I've seen his book," Ned said. "I'll see it again." "Do," Robert muttered and waved him away, and later that morning, the king rode out with a party that shone like summer. Renly and Loras flushed like roses, Barristan grave as a tomb, the kettle drums of hooves beating out excitement on packed earth, Lancel nervously proud with the great skin of wine slung like a second liver at his side. Varys did his best to fill the spaces between events with a silk thread. He came to Ned's solar smelling of oranges and sighs. "The girls?" he asked too innocently. "Gone," Ned said, and enjoyed for a heartbeat the spider's brief stillness, the way his eyes flickered in the web of possibilities. "And what a relief that must be," Varys said sweetly, recovering. "The Red Keep has sharp corners. Children find them with their faces. They will be safer on a ship." Ned thumbed back a page of the book Pycelle had given him the first week of his arrival. The lineages and hair colors of houses so old their bones were dust in the Seven's mouth. Names walked dumbly down the columns, seed and seed and seed, the Baratheon black like a stain that would not wash out. He traced a finger down to a line he now understood as a kind of prayer. "Tell me about a boy named Gendry, one of the city's innumerable sons," Varys said. "Dark of hair, stubborn of chin, like many. He makes good helm plates, hammers a true seam. Like many."
Ned murmuret.
His finger moved to other names, to Edric Storm in Far Nights, to a scatter of small black flames in places where Robert's laughter had left a wet mark and then dried. "And bastards inherit what hair their fathers give them. Sand and snow bear many colors," Varys said. "Law does not care for the barber's art. Law cares what a king calls his heir," Ned said and closed the book. "Send a fast ship to Dragonstone," he told Tomard later. "Address it to Lord Stannis Baratheon's own hand. Write that Eddard Stark begs counsel on matters that concern the blood of kings. Tell him," he paused. He felt suddenly the old weight of honor balancing like a sword's tip on his finger. "Tell him I believe his brother's children to be false issue. Tell him I will set proof in his hand within a fortnight." He exhaled. The air felt thin. "Make it swift." He did not sleep the night before the king's return. It was a close night, the sea with a fever, the torches shedding thick ropes of smoke. When dawn came, it came raw. Ned heard the horn before the words. He was there when they carried Robert in. The boar at his heel bled and sprawled like a grotesque hound that had finally turned and, dying, followed its master home. The smell of iron clung to everything. Ned took the hand that had once crushed him in embraces and resembled a fallen tree's root in its grip. It felt thin and very human now, a man's hand that would be cold before noon. 7, Robert whispered, eyes glassy with pain and poppy. Bloody gods, I told you I still had it in me. The bastard pig got lucky. He coughed. Blood bubbled. Right, boy, he told him hoarsely. Right as I say. Pycelle scooted and fussed. A parchment appeared, a quill, a slosh of ink. The room filled and emptied with small purposeful men. Cersei did not come. Renly had vanished with Loras before dawn. The city muttering that lovers run when they must, only half in scorn. What I say, Robert hissed and grimaced through a wave of agony. I leave all to my son, my heir. He blinked as if a small thing had flown into his eye. He'll do well so long as he has you and the old knight to cuff his ear when he's an idiot. Gods, I have been a poor king. Better to be poor at war than to be poor at peace. I forgot how to swing a hammer and thought I'd learn to sip. The drink? Ah, well. His eyes found Ned's, and for a moment friendship came back bare and unadorned, without crown or wolf. Don't let them make a fool of me when I'm dead. I will not, Ned said. He did not look at Pycelle as he wrote the word heir just so. The old man smacked his lips in absent worry and then smoothed his beard. Seal it, Robert said. I'll sleep now. Wake me when I'm better. Ned held the king's hand a moment longer and then let it go. When he stepped into the corridor, the air felt as thin as a blade drawn too fine. Varys ghosted beside him before the door had fully latched. The queen has gathered the city watch, he murmured. Ser Barristan is at prayer. Ser Jaime is not where he ought to be. Where ought he be? Ned asked. Somewhere I can see him, Varys said simply. Littlefinger has been a most busy friend of late. Ned thought of the river gate. He thought of yellow cloaks. He thought of the way Janos Slint's mouth had smoothed around the word pass as if he had decided to practice obedience as a hobby for the morning. He tasted lemon on his tongue. Where would you be if you were a spider with very old legs and you wished not to have them crushed? In the dark, Varys said cheerfully, where I am always at home. They met Littlefinger in a chamber that smelled of ink and plums. He was smiling. Ned had realized weeks ago that the man was most dangerous when delighted. Ah, Peter said, flicking a speck of nothing from his sleeve. We have come to that part of the game. You are late to the board, my lord. It amuses me. I have a man's will, Ned said. I have a boy's truth. I have the city watch's uncertain promises. How many knives have you placed under my feet? Littlefinger widened his eyes. You think me a footman for swords? I move purses. Gold cuts throats more cleanly than steel, with less complaining after. He set down the plum. Cersei has Janos. Janos has his men. You have your papers. You could walk to the throne room with those papers fluttering like banners. They will make a beautiful sound when they catch fire. Ned saw it. A room of red pillars. A boy on a chair too sharp to be a chair. A queen in green, eyes bright. The city watch cutting down men whose names Robert had spoken with meat in his teeth. He had seen that hall in dreams and woken with winter sweat. If I return to Winterfell, he said slowly, surprising himself, with my daughters safe and my men whole, I can swallow 1,000 insults and count myself a fortunate man. Always the North, Littlefinger sighed. You build ice castles in your head. There is a very fine one already in this city, and it's called a throne, and it will never be yours because you do not know how to lie to it. He leaned forward. Renly wanted you to seize the boy last night. You refused because you wanted a king's blessing. You will go to the throne with your paper. Cersei will come with flesh and coin. And when the watch chooses flesh and coin, you will bleed. He spread his hands. Or you could decline to attend. A certain door in the cellars opens to a stair that opens to a tunnel that opens to a little postern with a grateful door. There is a ship that would kiss you sweetly if you approached it quickly tonight. You would see me run, Ned said. It was not a question. "I would see you alive," Littlefinger said in a tone that meant, "I would see what good your survival might do me." Ned Stark had learned to weigh bad choices. He had not expected to have to do so in a place of heat and gold in summer with a friend dying 3 rooms away. He closed his eyes. He saw Sansa and Arya on a river that led to a sea that led to home. He saw Robb by the hearth, his hand lazy in a wolf's fur, the way the boy's eyes had sharpened over the last year whenever war was mentioned, as if the words themselves were blades he wished to hold. He saw Catelyn on a road, her face set. He did not know yet which road. "Varys," Ned said, opening his eyes. "How many whispers will it take to get a message to Dragonstone before dusk?" "Fewer than it would take tomorrow," Varys said, and nodded once. "Peter," Ned said, "tell Janos Slynt I will not call on him to prove his honor today. Tell him the Hand will not sit the throne while the king sleeps. Tell him the city will have no pageant this morning to sour his eggs." He smiled then. It did not reach his eyes. "And tell him that if any of his men so much as pull at a black hair on one of my men's heads as they leave the Red Keep, I will show him what honor looks like buried in the mud with a boot on its neck." "How northern," Littlefinger said, pleased. "How dull." He blew him a kiss of a bow. "As you wish." They left that afternoon with the sun making the stones sweat underfoot and the gulls screeching as if the city were a fish and they could smell the belly being split. Varys led them by places where light forgot to go. Men who had been boys with Ned in another life walked with him, long-faced and silent. In such moments, friendship grows roots kids cannot see. They moved like a single thought, purposeful and grim. At the postern, the air smelled of salt and slime. The door had no right to open for them. It did. Ned thought of all the doors in this city that opened when Varys asked and wondered which of them led to the rooms where children slept, which to meat cellars, which to rooms where men like him stood with their hands on their swords and counted breaths. On the river, the wind which raised her arms like a woman in prayer.
Ned hesitated.
"My lord," Jory said. Ned looked back at the red bones of the castle. He thought of Robert, and the promise he had made a dying man about fools and their legacies. "We are not sheep," he murmured, "nor are we wolves who cannot choose not to bare their teeth." "Speak northern, my lord," Jory said, and grinned without heat. "We will not be shepherded to the slaughter," Ned said. "We sail for Dragonstone." The ship sighed, accepted them, and pushed off with a sound like a man taking a relieved breath after standing too long under a weight. The city withdrew. It looked almost beautiful, in that way places do when they are dangerous and you are leaving them at last. Seabirds traced white scratches over sky and water. The mast creaked as if talking to itself. Ned stood at the rail and watched King's Landing slip back, the Sept's dome a bright bubble, the Red Keep's angles too sharp for the eye to rest. That night the sea walked them slowly toward a dark line where the Dragon's Island slept. The men slept in knots and starts. Ned did not sleep. When the stars were raw cold above him and the waves had flattened to whispers, a small shape appeared at his elbow, too quiet to be a full-grown noise in the world. Arya scuffed one toe on the deck, then leaned against him with the imperious weight only a daughter can bring. "You did it," she said. "I did something," he said. She tipped her head back and squinted up at the stars. "Syrio says there are names for them in Bravos and names for them in Westeros and names for them in summer. But the stars don't care. They don't listen. Syrio is a wise man. He also says that sometimes the best way to win is to leave." She made a face, which the knight kindly did not show him. "I do not like that lesson." "Neither do I," Ned said. The air bit his lungs. He thought of a man with a hammer, a boar's low squeal, a queen with eyes as bright as broken glass. "We will have other fights." She was silent a long while, then said almost shyly, "Do you remember when we found the litter of pups?" "I remember every hair," he said, and they stood together in the sound of the sea until her head grew heavy on his side and he carried her below and laid her down, and the ship rocked, and the world decided to keep turning. Dragonstone rose from the dawn like a memory learned by the bones before the mind could catch it. It was black and old, and shapes had been set into it that did not look like any work of any living mason. The dragon mouths gaped and the windows were eyes. The bridge arched like a back. The sea broke and broke and broke at its feet, in love with the rock and in anger at it all at once. The wind which crept toward the mooring with the humility of a much smaller thing. Stannis Baratheon greeted Ned Stark at the base of a stair that had eaten many sandals. He stood like a man who believed that straightness was a kind of war. He was not as tall as Robert and not as warm, and the sun took nothing from his black hair. It gave nothing back. His face was full of edges. Beside him stood a man with a smuggler's eyes and a lord's cloak. Davos, Ned learned, to whom Stannis spoke as one speaks to the hand that has held your life in it. "Lord Stark," Stannis said. He wasted no breath on welcome. "You have brought a storm with you." "I have brought a truth," Ned said, and the guards around them shifted like trees in wind. "Robert is dying." "Is he dead?" Stannis asked, and when Ned did not answer immediately, because the word itself had weight enough to bend some men, Stannis's mouth became a tighter line.
"No."
"But he will be, and his queen has sharpened every sword she can find." "Come." They walked up into the castle's dark, and the air tasted of old smoke and salt and something else that made Ned think of a cave where a fire had burned too long and eaten too much of the air. In a chamber that looked out over the sea, they spread Ned's proofs like a merchant setting out bolts of cloth. Names lay down in lines. The book Pycelle had given him, the white words set against all that thick, black Baratheon hair, lay open. Through it all, Melisandre watched him from the edge of the room, red as a fresh cut. Her eyes were like coals, and they did not blink, and if they saw anything human in him, they did not allow it to reach her mouth. "You bring paper," Stannis said, turning one page with a finger that made a sound like a nail over wood. "I bring boys," Ned said. "A smith's apprentice with a face like your brother's, an island child with the same stubborn hair, a dozen more I could name if we had a day and the will to stomach them. And I bring a queen and a twin brother in bed with her, in all likelihood since before the first of those children drew breath." Stannis's face did not change. He seemed a man made of a harder rock than the island that bore him. "I knew," he said, and it sounded less like boasting than like confession. "Or, rather, I suspected and could not convince myself that suspicion was not the name I gave to envy. Jon Arryn knew. He died. I left the city. It appears I failed my brother with my caution as you failed him with your honor." Ned took it. The words did not move him. He had said them to himself already, sharpened with honesty until they could cut him daily without dulling. "We can still serve him by saving his house." Stannis looked at the sea. It beat at the rock as if it were a door it intended to break down if only time would lend it a heavier shoulder. "I am king when he dies," he said, like a man naming hunger and not ashamed of it. "By law and by sense and by the gods' displeasure and the realm's need. My brother's bastards do not inherit. His queen's bastards inherit nothing but my contempt and the headsman's quick mercy if they are fortunate." Ned thought of a boy in a guild apron watching a lord come to see him as if he were a thing worth looking at. "They are children," he said, without much hope of it doing him good to say it. Stannis did not bother to answer. Davos shifted his weight. A ring of knuckles cracked. Melisandre smiled into the dark. "I will write," Stannis went on. "I will write to every lord with a brain and a son and a book. I will write to those who would rather choke on their wine than see my face at their table. I will send men to seize the Red Keep when Robert dies and the queen tries to seat her spawn. I will flame her out of her nest. You will need allies," Ned said, "and I will be one. The North will not stand for a false king." Stannis's glance was piercing and unlovely. "Will it? You pray you are right. The boy who calls himself your heir is in the Riverlands by now if he has any sense. He will not enjoy being told that the crown he can feel pricking him like a rash belongs to a southern lord with bad manners." "Robb will do as I say," Ned said, and believed it because he needed to. Davos cleared his throat. He had a low, pleasant voice, like a kettle purring on a good fire. "You have sent your daughters north," he said. There is some hope in a man who puts the sea between his children and his pride. Ned could not help the brief, bitter smile. I like you, sir. Not sir, Davos said, amused. I have no such pretty in front of my name. Just Davos, for my sins. The lady would fix that if she had her will of my hand. He glanced at Melisandre and his mouth did not precisely tighten, but neither did it soften. Titles are tricks, Melisandre said. Her accent made the common words sound like precious metal. Light unmasks tricks. You will lean into light before you die, Lord Stark, I think. I hope to lean into a hearth in Winterfell and sip something hot, Ned said. I will leave light outside my door unless it asks humbly to come in and promises not to set the rugs afire. You jest, Stannis said without humor. We do not have time for it. Then we will make time, Ned said, surprising himself again. Because all we have left otherwise is the Queen's crackling fire and boys with lions where their hearts should be. They schemed, then, as decent men must when indecent men have gathered all the coin and half the swords. Ravens flew. Ships creaked. Ned sent Jory north with a pack of letters and a quiet promise that if the gods were merciful he would be a week behind. He wrote to Catelyn in a hand that had not trembled when he faced a king but trembled now, asking her to hold the river like a wife holds a hearth when winter comes unexpected in autumn. He wrote to Robb and told him to call the banners like a man. He wrote to Maester Luwin and asked him to keep the hearths alive and the doors barred and the children he had not yet met by whatever cruel joke the world played on him safe by any means that did not ruin them. They learned that Tyrion Lannister had been seized on a road of middling fame by Ned's own wife and had talked himself out of a terrible room in a mountain by persuading a Sellsword to kill someone for him. They learned that Tywin Lannister had put on his armor as if it were his holiday clothes. They learned that the Riverlands had begun to burn like old straw and that knights with candles on their helms had ridden through villages and left children with no fathers to bar the door. War, then, Stannis said, unsurprised. Good. War never was good, Davos muttered, and received a look that said, Be careful how loudly you speak truth in a room that needs lies. When Robert died, the sea was very calm, as if it were minding its manners out of respect for an old drunk who had swung a hammer more honestly than he had ever held a quill. A raven came in the morning, looking both ridiculous and holy as all ravens do when they carry words men will kill and die for. Ned read it and exhaled as if someone had reached into him and pulled a long splinter in one easy, unforgiving motion. He bowed his head for friendship and youth and the sudden, useless fury that he had not made the man safer in his bed. Now, Stannis said, we go. They went with the day. The fleet that had not been expected to be a fleet rose small and hungry from Dragonstone's shadow. Melisandre stood on the forecastle of Stannis's lead ship and sang in a tongue that made even the waves stoop to hear. Men cross themselves the way men do when they cannot remember which god they swore to first. Ned stood with Davos on the wind which, his face pulled in two directions at once. Toward the city where a queen would be crowning a bastard, and toward the north where his children would be walking on flagstones he had paid for with a wolf's blood and his own foolish pride. King's Landing greeted them with gulls and smoke and a wall of yellow cloaks. Cersei had eaten the city quickly. The red keeps banners lifted lazy in the weak wind. The lion's red mouth looked wetter than ever. From the river, the city's filth looked innocuous, like something painted on a child's toy. Stannis meant to strike at once. He was anger honed into timing. The plan was clean and would have worked in a world where men held to the oaths they spoke over their children's heads. The city watch, faced with a line of ships and the sudden prospect of being the first yard of ground taken in a fresh war, shifted and muttered and remembered bribes that had already fattened their pockets. Gold does not rust. Littlefinger's smile, wherever he was, stretched a fraction wider. The first skirmish on the quay was a study in how quickly men who had been boys can become corpses. Ned watched and for once did not leap into the center of the lesson. He had given Stannis the proof and the North's promise. He had given his daughters a ship. He found himself with not much left to give that would change the day if he surrendered it now, and he chose to husband it for a day that could be altered. Inside the city, Joffrey sat on iron and called himself king. Cersei's face was lit the way a skinner's face is lit when his knife runs clean and he has not nicked his fingers. The lords bent because the room was full of swords. Ser Barristan stood at the far edge of the red tapestry and looked very tired. The fleet broke and bled back to the mouth of the Blackwater with less loss than a hot-headed man might have thrown away, more loss than a careful one could bear. Stannis watched the city as if he could set it afire with his eyes. "We withdraw," he said. He did not look at Ned. "We will not waste men on stones that have been paid for twice over already with treachery." "You will need the Stormlands," Ned said, hoarse, "and the Riverlands. You will need the North." "I will have them," Stannis said, "or I will have their graves." In the weeks that followed, ravens carried threats and pleas and truth in equal measure over fields that had grown wheat and were now full of men practicing how to kill someone who looked very much like themselves. The Riverlands burned. Robb raised the North like a man pulling a rope he knew would tear the skin of his palms. The Freys counted and waited. The Tyrells watched, noses to the wind, then turned their banners toward the capital with an ease that might have been grace if it had not smelled so much of calculation. Sansa came to Winterfell with the first real frost. The sea left her with salt in her hair and a set to her mouth that had not been there when she had left. Lady Stone was cold against her palm. She wept then, who had not wept at the gate, who had not wept when the wind which rocked and the city fell away like a dream. She wept not because of any single thing, but because all the things had finally decided to claim their due. Arya stood with her and made awkward, furious little circles in the snow with her boots, as if she could carve out a place for grief and make it stay where she put it. Maester Luwin looked at them and saw ghosts and a future he could not instruct with tidy words. He wrote to Ned that night by a fire that crackled dutifully. He told him the girls had come and that they slept, and that the North had already begun to whisper itself awake in ways Luwin did not like. He said, and meant it, that Winterfell missed him, as a house misses a man who walks like a shadow through its rooms at all hours whether he is there or not. He tied the letter to the raven's leg and stroked its black neck until it cocked its head at him and looked like judgment. Catelyn met Robb at the Twins and found that her boy had planted his feet in a soil he had not known till now he possessed. He was his father's son and he was not. He listened to counsel and he wielded it. He did not rush, but neither did he freeze. He talked of lords and crossings and the worth of a man's pride in the currency of other men's lives. She listened. She thought of Ned, and of a hall full of candles, of a girl with her hands folded, of a boy's lips tightening into a line like a seam pulled too taut. She thought of a river full of ice and men falling through. When Ned and Stannis rode together at last into the Stormlands, Davos 2 horse lengths to the rear, Melisandre a smudge of red behind them, the sky broke into small, sullen rain for an hour and then decided not to bother. They were greeted with cold courtesy by men who preferred Renly's laughter to Stannis' teeth and yet had the wit to know that laughter had found an end. Ned thought of all the ways men choose kings. By longing, by law, by fear, by hunger. He thought of his daughters under Winterfell's smoky sky and told himself that if he could bring the realm a ruler who would not bite out chunks of it merely to see what raw meat tasted like, then he had not wholly failed. In the capital, Joffrey grew crueler with every hour that passed without anyone telling him no. Cersei's smiles grew thinner and sharper. Tyrion Lannister returned to the city and tried, in his crooked way, to put some order to it. He found, as all men do, that order in King's Landing is a strange breed. Comes when not looked for and flees when called. He learned that Sansa Stark had slipped the city's grasp, and he did not know whether to be relieved for her or disappointed for the leverage she represented. He contented himself with not having to watch her break further. At Dragonstone, Melisandre burned wooden men and asked the flames what names they had always known and would always know. She told Stannis that shadows have work to do and did not elaborate until he pressed her. And then she spoke of a king who steals a crown with a kiss and called him a thief and a murderer, and said this was a crime fire could punish. "I will not kill children in their beds," Ned said when she hinted as much. He felt the flame's heat on his face, the way it stroked rather than bit, and understood some of the seduction of simple certainties. Fire, at least, does not lie when it eats. If my ally intends to govern by sorcery, He will do so without the North. Stannis looked between them and made a choice in the silence that came. Not mercy exactly, but calculation that did not require the evils the Red Woman seemed to find so easy to ignore. "We take the trident," he said instead. "We cut the Lannisters from the neck and starve the head." They moved like men who are tired of so much thinking. The trident wore the scars of 100 maps. The river was a dirty silver in the morning. Robb met them with the howls of the North at his back and the Tully trout flashing above 1,000 shoulders. He bowed to Stannis with courtesy, to his father with something the men watching could not name and would not forget. "Father," he said simply, and for a moment the world was a small room in a winter tower again. Then the moment ended and the men around them breathed, and Theon Greyjoy laughed too loudly, and the Great John roared something obscene about Lannister mothers, and the battle that would wash the banks of the Trident with red for a day and whispers for a generation began to gather itself up. Ned rode where the work was worst, as he always had. He did not swing the day by personal heroics. Lives are not counted like that in honest ledgers. But men who saw him ride steadied. Purpose moved through the line as if someone had laid a hand across the backs of men and smoothed them the right way. Stannis's discipline bit. Robb's youth burned. Davos held the right from breaking with a look and a word and an old sailor's laugh. When the sun finally found a hole in the clouds to shove itself through, the lions were leaving the field in a disordered retreat. Tywin Lannister did not break. He bent and bent and bent and then slid away sideways like a clever fish. That night, men ate meat that tasted of ash and victory. Ravens went up again tirelessly. 1,000 small kings were made in as many tents, each lord tasting his own preeminence. Stannis sat with his jaw clenched in a manner that said he understood he had passed through fire and came out on the right side only because the other side had been sloppy, not because Flame loved him. Robb crept to his father's tent when the men had thinned and sat on a crate and looked very briefly like a boy whose hand ached and was not ashamed to say it. "You did not kneel," Ned said. He did not make it accusation or command. Robb stared at the ground and then, as if deciding that since he was already in pain, he could endure a little more, looked up. "I will," he said, "to the right man, at the right time, and I will not if he's wrong." "Good," Ned said simply. "I would have whipped you if you had said anything else." Robb smiled then, a real one that made him look younger and no less great. "Mother says the Freys are snakes. Your mother is uncharitable only when she's right," Ned said, dry. "Be generous with promises you can keep. Be stingy with promises you cannot." "Is that what you did?" Robb asked. Ned remembered a feast and a field of candles and a girl's eyes. "I am learning to," he said. By the time winter began to announce itself with a breath colder than the last and a memory of older snows, the realm had rearranged itself like a table after some cups have been upset. The Tyrells had smiled and dressed and slid their banners into the capital with the sort of charm that makes men forget to count their rings. Joffrey played at kingship with the cruelty of a boy pulling flies apart. Cersei poured herself thin and green into every crack the city had left, and it had many. Tyrion set small snares for big men and saved lives where he could, which was not often enough even for his dry palate. Stannis hammered and hammered. The north held. The river smoked. The sea went on with its patient work, unbothered by which names men wrote on the sand. One morning, the first true bite of winter in the air, Sansa rose before dawn and walked the walls with her cloak wrapped under her chin. She could feel the keep breathing. It did that when it pleased, like a gentle animal too old to be spooked by anything less than a dragon. Arya slept, sprawled like a puppy, one arm thrown above her head in an attitude too proud for dreams. Sansa watched her sister's mouth the night before when it had softened in sleep, and loved her then with something that had nothing to do with songs and everything to do with having lost and found. She looked east, though east was not where the sun came from when it came from the heart. She thought of a hall full of light. She thought of a boy who had been a prince, and of the way his mouth had tightened when he forgot that he was beloved. She thought of a father's rough palm finding the crown of her head when she was little and she had cried because she had torn her gown and he had said, very solemn, that he knew a seamstress who could sew anything as long as he gave her a little time and the right thread. She had believed him because she had been small. She believed him now because she had grown. She wrapped her cloak more tightly and said very quietly to the old stones, "I am a stitch then, so me, father." The wind took her words like a promise and looked after them. Far to the south, on ground that had tasted too much blood and not enough rest, Eddard Stark knelt in a makeshift sept of canvas and wood, and did something he had not done since he was a boy with cold knees. He asked for patience. Not victory, not even justice, which had soured in his mouth lately like milk left too long by a hearth he did not control. He asked for the patience to keep choosing correctly in a world that punished such choices, the patience to look at his enemies and see men there and not shapes to be cut up, the patience to go home eventually and die in his bed. Not because he feared dying anywhere else, but because men deserve the small human graces when the big ones have been portions for kings. The sept was quiet. The wind ticked softly at the canvas. Davos's cough sounded outside, polite as his gentle hands. When Ned rose, Stannis awaited him, jaw as rigid as duty. "The Tyrell alliance changes the capital," he said. "They will marry the girl to the boy and make a pageant of it and call it peace." "Girls and boys do not make peace," Ned said. "Men do, and sometimes women. But if I can keep one girl from being used as horseflesh for a bargain, then I will continue to break betrothals until the singers run out of rhymes." "You speak glib of thrones," Stannis said, but his eyes were less cold than the sea would have made them. "We will take the capital," Ned said quietly. He did not put a time to it. He did not attach a boast. "And when we do, we will not burn it to the ground. The realm is a kind of child. You must not beat it just because it misbehaves." For a long moment, Stannis looked at him, and Ned saw in the other man all the years that had carved him into this hard shape. "We will take it," Stannis said, and that, from him, was almost a prayer. Before they did, there would be battles whose names would stain the river a deeper blue on mapmakers' drawings. There would be houses who sided wrong and houses who sided right for the wrong reason. There would be ravens that never came and men who came too late and men who came too early and died because they believed that punctuality and courage were the same. Tyrion Lannister would stand on a broken wall and tell jokes to men who needed them more than bread. Melisandre would set fires and read them like a doctor reads a fever. Davos would lose something and gain something and decide that the scales were not even and never would be. Robb Stark would learn what promise tastes like when chewed too long. Catelyn would remind a lord that a woman's word is a stone, which breaks knuckles when struck. Arya would learn where shadows wait in Winterfell and make friends of some and enemies of others, and not always in that order. Sansa would watch the snow begin to fall and would not tell anyone that it made her happy, because she had learned that happiness is like a little bird in a hand, and that you must keep a hand over it while you breathe, else it flies and believes you did not deserve it in the first place. And Eddard Stark would stand and stand and stand again, and sometimes he would fall to one knee, but he would rise. Behind him the north breathed old lungs, remembering the muscles of winter. In front of him a city glittered cruel as a necklace on a throat too thin to bear it. He had broken a betrothal with a single winter word in a hall of candles. 100 large things had followed from that small noble treachery against custom. 100 more would follow still. But when he lay down at last under Winterfell's old, patient stones in years to come, when the storms had blown themselves out over a dozen fields and the children had found their own rooms and their own doors to close, when he put his head on a pillow that remembered him better than any man in the South, he would think sometimes, in the moments before sleep crept in like a cat and curled itself on his chest, of a night when he had stood and chosen wrong by custom and right by blood. And the choice would feel, then as now, like the only truth he had ever really known.